Alrighty, guys, welcome everybody to tonight's webinar on scholarships. So we're very, very lucky to have Anastasia here today. So please welcome Anastasia, guys. I'll make sure that everyone is in. So we're just going to wait a little bit for everyone to come in. We have a lot of people as usual. And Anastasia's graciously given her time to pop in today and give some insight into scholarships. Alrighty, guys. So just to give you guys a little bit of an overview of things that we will cover today, we're mainly going to be going through the different types of schools that you can get scholarships to. We're also going to be going through the different interview questions that might be asked. We're also going to be talking about the innate differences between boys and girls schools, as well as talk about, the different programs that are involved in each school. And on top of that, we're also going to be going through the, what kind of schools are best suited for subjects like medicine, and what schools are best suited for developing your music abilities and things along that line. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin today's webinar. So Anastasia, can you give everybody a little bit of a background of you, kind of what you studied, which school did you go to? Things like that, your ATAR, just so that everybody knows who you are.
Yeah, so welcome guys. In case you haven't seen me before, my name is Anastasia. So I graduated, of course, with an ATAR of 99.95. I did do quite a few STEM heavy subjects. So I did like maths, physics, chem, all that sort of stuff. And I graduated from Santa Sabina College, which is an all girls private school.
Cool. So I think we'll just start there. What was your experience at Santa Sabina like? And can you comment on how Santa Sabina is like compared to, let's say, the other kind of girls' private schools in the region? Because there's Merredin, there's MLC, there's PLC.
Yeah. So there's quite a few around like the Strathfield area. My parents and I really, really liked Santa Sabina because it did have like smaller classes compared to other schools. So you actually got a bit more one-on-one time with teachers. Which was good because there were quite a few other schools, like I know Merredin has quite big classes, MLC as well. And also a lot of the different schools in the area focus on different things. So my school did have quite a big focus on STEM and music. So anyone who does music, they offer a lot of music scholarships and stuff as well. And they had quite a few STEM pathways, which really interested me. Whereas there were some other schools around the area that focused on different things. So maybe that might be sport, it might be art, it might be dance, whatever else. There might be some schools that focus more on ethics and philosophy style subjects. So make sure you also have a look at that when you're trying to choose what type of schools you're looking into.
Yeah. So in terms of the inner west schools, Anna, you obviously did you did IB, and most of the inner west schools do offer IB. So MLC, Newington, Trinity. What are your thoughts on whether a parent should choose a school based on if it offers IB or not, and kind of how does that affect a child's development? Because I know that most kids at these schools, the smarter ones, end up doing IB. So how would you advise a parent on IB versus HSC, and how to go about picking schools based on that?
They're definitely two completely different systems. I don't think one is inherently better than the other, but I do think it's very good to have that choice. So for me, going into year 7, I had no idea whether I was going to take IB or HSC. I did take some accelerated HSC subjects in year 10. So I took maths accelerated. So I did year 11 maths in year 10, but I still dropped it so I could do IB in year 11 and 12. So if I had kept that going, I would have had less subjects in year 12. But I did end up choosing IB because it gave me a broader options. Like it actually makes you do 6 subjects from 6 different categories. If you guys didn't know that before, basically how it works is you have to take 1 science, 1 level of maths, 1 level of English, 1 second language. You have to do a language, right? And then you either take a creative subject or you double up on a subject. Whereas HSC is more specialized. So you can do just maths, physics, chem, and English, and that's 10 units, right? You don't have to spread out as much. So if you're someone who doesn't really know what you want to do, you want more options, and you don't really like getting ranked, if you don't like the sort of ranking-based system that's in HSC, you could choose IB. If you're someone who prefers to specialize, you know exactly what you want to do. Let's say you want to do medicine and you're 100% sure, and you know you love maths, you love chem, then you can take HSC, right? So it really depends on you, but I would say that it is very, very good to have that option. Like, it's good because I'm assuming most of you guys would actually not know by the time you get into year 7 what you want to do in year 12, right? There's lots of learning still to happen in the remainder of high school. There's so much stuff that you're still learning. So it is great to have that option. That was one of the things that my parents were looking into as well when I was choosing schools.
Cool. And so, yeah, I would add on to what Anastasia said. The inner west schools are great because they offer IB. A lot of the North Shore schools don't offer that option. Pretty sure it's only Ravenswood, right, that offers IB.
And Queenwood.
And Queenwood, yeah, Ravenswood and Queenwood offer IB, but a lot of the inner west schools do. Out of the IB schools, can you comment on which IB schools are stronger, weaker, how they kind of navigate around that? You know, how does IB affect, you know, medical admissions, you know, things like that? Because obviously a lot of you guys end up getting 45, right? So can you just comment on that a little bit?
Yeah. So they did recently change the conversion from an IB school to an ATAR. So in case you guys didn't know, basically what happens in the IB is you get a score out of 45. It's determined based on what grade you got each of your subjects. If you got the highest band, that sort of adds up to 45. And basically the University Admission Center then takes that score and converts it to an ATAR and ranks you against all the other HSC kids and interstate kids and international kids and whatever else. So before they changed it, there were a bunch of 45s. So it didn't really matter as much what school you went to because wherever you were, you could still get the 45. Now, though, the system has changed as of last year, which means that if you are looking at the 99.95, you want that really, really high ATAR, you have to get something actually that's a little bit above just a 45, which means you'd be looking at some of those strongest schools. So in terms of my cohort, it didn't really matter as much, but for your guys' cohort, it will. So if you're looking at all boys schools, because most of these schools are single sex schools, the strongest performers have historically been Trinity and Newington. Those were the two schools that were doing really, really well in IB. If you're looking at girls' schools, MLC has had the longest experience with IB, and I think recently Ravenswood has also been quite good. There's a few other ones opening up as well that aren't as experienced, but those are historically the two longest schools that have been doing IB are Trinity and MLC. They've been doing it for ages. So they're the ones that you're looking at.
Cool. Any advice to okay, so I've heard these like things where a lot of kids get 45, like let's say at MLC, there's like 7 or 8 kids who get 45, right? And then they all try for UCID Med and none of them get in, right? So can you please comment on that? Like, why is that the case?
Yeah,
And
there were like in my cohort alone, I think there were about maybe 6 MLC girls in my interview, and none of them got it.
yeah,
Right. And it does happen with a lot of schools. Like you'll see people that get the ATAR that don't end up getting into medicine or dentistry or any other interview-based course. Because the first thing they do, like the first thing they said to us when we got into that interview was, we know you have the marks. We don't care anymore. Now you got to show me what else you have. Like you all got a 99.95 in here. So if you tell me, oh, I did this subject in school, that's not what's going to get you into medicine. That's not what's going to get you into that interview. So you have to make sure that you're an all-rounder if these are the types of things that you're looking at. We've got like debating and public speaking here at Scholarly, for example. You can play sport, you can play musical instruments, you can do all sorts of stuff. But what you really want to show is that you have abilities beyond just your academics, okay? So that can be anything. I did like a lot of volunteering in school. I played competitive sport for a while, did all sorts of stuff. And those are the type of things that I was mentioning in the interview. They look at things like your emotional maturity as well. Like obviously medicine is a very heavy career. Like it's quite difficult seeing like, dying people in a hospital when you're actually working there. So they're testing you on things like, how can you handle these situations under pressure? So that's why you really have to be an all-rounder for these sorts of degrees. And that's why you'll see lots of people that get the marks that don't get in.
Yeah, cool. Do you think there's discrimination towards kids who get 45 in IB at all? Maybe in the past, maybe not now because of obviously the changes, but do you think there was in the past?
It's very tricky because they don't tell you like a quota of how many people they allow in, but I can tell you for sure that for my cohort at least, they had 2 different interview groups. One was the IB group and interstate and international students, because we got our results before the HSC kids that year. And the second group was the HSC results. And we got our admissions the day of the interview, which means they must have had a quota of how many IB kids they were going to let in. So then they just did the HSC admissions after us. And actually what ended up being is there were less IB kids from what it ended up turning out, but they did also exceed the total number of people that they were going to let into the course. So just to give you guys like a couple numbers so you know how it works, the USAID medical program has quotas of how many people they can let in. If you want to get in straight from school, which means you don't have to sit all these massive exams like the GAMSAT afterwards, there are 30 spots for domestic students in the whole country and 10 spots for international students. So that's 40 people total, right? In my cohort, I don't know the exact number, but they let around 45 to 50. So they can go over that number. But what that means is that in the postgraduate, they can accept less people. Because in total, if you count the undergrad and the postgrad, it's 300 people. So if they let in 50 for us, that means there are 10 less spots for my cohort when the postgraduate admissions start. So it is a tricky numbers game, and they're not entirely transparent with that. And I don't think they will ever be, because I think they don't want that information sort of getting out. But it's very competitive. So whether you get an undergrad, postgrad, that number stays capped.
Can you comment on how many IB kids there are in your year? Do you remember? Like rough numbers, don't give exact numbers. Less or more than 10? Like,
I think it's slightly more than 10.
Okay.
Slightly.
Is that including international students as well?
I don't think there were many international IB students. There were people doing like A levels and things like that. But for the most part, the IB students were either domestic or interstate. So there were a couple from like Queensland and whatever else.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think as Anastasia mentioned earlier, and we'll open it up for questions in just a second. When parents ask HSC, IB, as Anastasia said, going to a school that offers both is generally pretty good because at least you have the option to explore. What I have seen though is at the IB heavy schools like Trinity and MLC, if you're smart, you're typically encouraged to do the IB. So that's just something to be aware of. So it's unlikely that you're going to do the HSC. But having said that, if you're very strong in your humanities, you want a more broad perspective, IB is a great option. If you want to be more specialized, you're very good at maths, you want to do your chemistry, you want to do like 4 subjects instead of 6, then HSC is the option. Okay, cool. So let's open up to the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so we're definitely going to be going through the different schools, but yeah, any questions at all? And I will be kicking out Aiden Fan right now because he is rudely disrupting everybody. So Aiden, sorry, man, you are gone. Okay. All right, cool. So let's go through the questions. What is the best scholarship school for maths and sports? Let's just focus on the Inner West right now. Anastasia, do you have any ideas about that? Sports, let's say like MLC would probably be the best. Yeah.
Sports, I guess it does kind of depend on what type of sport. So I know for things like tennis, like Meriden is very strong in that. Like they used to verse my school and they'd always win every year. So if you're interested in some sports like that, Meriden, MLC is generally pretty good at sports as well. But I would look specifically into like the type of sport that you care about, because it really does vary between different schools. And in terms of maths, I would say maths is a tricky one to pick because it really depends on the level of maths that you're thinking of doing. So I would say regardless of the school that you end up choosing, if you do take either 4-unit maths in HSC, so that's Extension 2 maths, or you take higher level maths in IB, which is what I took, you will be pretty supported either way because the syllabus is the syllabus. They still have to teach it to you. You will notice as well that like a lot of work is going to go into that maths because it's a very high level of maths, HSC or IB. A lot of work is going to go into that at home, etc., etc. So if you're thinking like maths heavy, you're going to have to do some work at home as well. The teacher and the school is not going to be enough.
Can you comment on higher level maths in IB? Because that's arguably more difficult than 4 unit, right? You went to Santa Sabina, you did that. Typically, from what I've heard, it's very hard to get a 7 in higher level maths, right? So can you comment on what it was like at Santa Sabina, or what it's like at other schools? Do you have like rough like numbers, statistics, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so not many people take it. That's the first thing. You will notice, I've noticed as well that in HSC extension 2, it's still not very common, but it is more common than IB maths because HSC has scaling. So a lot of people take extension 2 maths, even if they're not that good at maths, because they want to get scaled. Like you might get a 90 in extension 2, but it might get scaled to like a 95, a 96, whatever else. Whereas at IB, there is no scaling. Your mark is your mark. So that's why a lot of people don't take it in IB, because if they don't get the mark, that's it. Like there's no scaling, there's no nothing. So in terms of class sizes, around all the schools, there's not that many people. Like even in big schools, like I know Newington has a big cohort for overall IB. There's only like less than 10 people that take higher level maths. My cohort literally had 2 of us that did it. So there's not many at all in around all of Sydney. So no matter what school you go to, majority of people do not take it because it's hard. Like it is definitely difficult. It does give you quite a bit of an advantage though, if you are looking at any engineering related careers specifically, like they require a lot of maths. If you're looking at computer science, it's a very popular field now. If you're looking at anything tech related, even if it's not specifically maths, you should take a higher level of maths because it's a type of thing that if you're behind from school, it's very difficult to catch up later in university. Whereas there are other subjects that if you didn't take them in school, you're not really disadvantaged going into university because you can take introductory courses for whatever you do and it's all good. Whereas maths, the type of thing, like it's too big of a jump from advanced maths to 4-unit maths or from standard level IB to higher level IB if you don't take it. In my opinion, I would definitely recommend it. Like I really enjoyed it. It was hard, but I think it was a pretty good course. It definitely requires practice and lots of hard work. But if you keep practicing and you keep going at it, there's no reason why you shouldn't take it, especially if you're considering any of those careers that I mentioned earlier. It's a really, really good thing to have. Even like if you're considering any like economics-based career or econometrics, stuff like that, another field that you might be looking at maths.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, Pallavi asks, how much focus on non-curricular activities for entry to private scholarship school? I'll answer this one quickly. So basically, you definitely need a lot of non-curricular activities or extracurricular activities on your portfolio to have a strong scholarship portfolio. It's very important to try to find subjects that are more so around public speaking, debating, drama, rather than music, in my personal opinion, because a lot of the kids who go for scholarships are typically Asian, and a lot of Asian kids do music. And so you're not really going to differentiate yourself if you just play a musical instrument. Okay, just honestly speaking, not that big of a differentiator. Anastasia could probably comment the same with my guess with like, entry into medicine as well. Like there are a lot of kids who know how to play piano, not going to really be that useful, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say like even for med as well, it's the same thing. Like they want to really see, and it's the same thing for like even year 7 scholarships, right? They want to see stuff that's actually going to help you be a better member of the community, that's going to actually help the school. So if you can play the piano, that's great, but it's not really doing that much to the school. Like it's not a bad thing, but it's not actually helping the school anyway. Whereas if you're a very good public speaker, if you're a very good communicator, and you can show those skills, that's actually something that's going to make a big difference in the school. And that's why they would prefer that sort of stuff over just an instrument. And it's the same thing for postgrad, med, any scholarship, whatever you're looking at.
Yeah, I would argue that team-based sports are typically good. Orchestra is a lot better than a single instrument, if you're going to mention that most people who play instruments aren't in orchestras. Team-based sports, try not to do anything that is just singular, you know what I mean? So chess, arguably it's okay, but again, you're not really doing it in a group. Unique things like coding might be helpful. Participation in like big competitions is generally good, but yeah, try not to find things that everybody else is, typically doing. Okay, is King's a great school? Yes, it is a very, very good school. Kambala, do you know anything about Kambala? Anastasia, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think now recently, like Eastern Suburbs schools in general, like Kambala, are sort of trying to like climb up the ranks academically as well. So I have heard pretty good things about Kambala. I do think they do also offer IB. I could be wrong on that one.
Yeah.
I have to double check and get back to you guys. But a lot of the Eastern Suburb schools are starting IB now. So I know Cranbrook just started and Kambala is sort of in a similar position. So if you do want that option, there are some Eastern Suburbs options there as well, but they're not as experienced as Inner West. Overall, though, I have heard like some pretty good things about Kambala. I don't really know too much about it personally.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be like a pretty good environment. And there were actually a bunch of teachers from my school that moved to Kambala. So it must be pretty good for them to be moving.
Yeah, cool. So as I was mentioning in another class, Inner West has always been historically very, very powerful, right? So like if you think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, MLC was like kind of the go-to school. They have a lot of pedigree in terms of IB. The Eastern Suburbs, not so much. But what I've seen also is people are kind of shifting towards the North Shore, towards the Eastern Suburbs. They're still relatively inaccessible to a lot of, I'd say, kids from like Hurstville, like, you know, people who are like below the Harbour Bridge. But having said that, there's definitely more and more people going to those schools. Okay. Cool. Let's go through some more questions. Abbotsleigh or Ravenswood better? Again, Abbotsleigh is better academically. Ravenswood is probably more normal of a school. Ravenswood offers IB, Abbotsleigh doesn't. So that probably summarizes all of that. All right, cool. Any other questions, guys? Comment down below. Any other questions? Okay, cool. All right, so we have quite a few questions. Anastasia, you can pick like a question as well if you want, and I'll go about answering some of these. Okay, so how is the scholarship test different from the selective? There's no thinking skills and it tests GA. What is IB? Google it. It's just the equivalent of HSC. Skeggs versus Meriden. I'd say Skeggs is slightly better than Meriden, simply because it's more, it's generally a little bit bigger of a school, and I'd say that the demographic is more mixed than Meriden, but Meriden is a great school nonetheless, especially if you like music and you're close to the Inner West. Okay, in terms of school size, how do I know if a bigger school or a medium school is a better option for my kid? Can you answer that question, Anastasia?
Yeah.
So how do I know if a bigger school, smaller school, what are the preferences? That's kind of like how your parents probably made their choice, right? Yeah.
I would say looking specifically at class sizes is more important than the overall size of the cohort, because you're really looking at like how much attention is my child going to get from teachers. If there's like 250 kids in a year group, that's not too big of an issue as long as they still have decent class sizes. Like if you have 40 kids in the class, there's no chance you're going to have a good learning environment. It's too distracting. There's too much going on in the classroom. There's always going to be those kids that's going to distract you no matter what school you go to. So I would say definitely I would put a bigger emphasis on class sizes and like sort of the learning culture of the school. I don't think in particular the overall size of the cohort plays too much into it. Like even all those schools that you've listed in the question, MLC, Pymble, Ravenswood, Winona, like those are all considered pretty good schools regardless of the class of the cohort size. So I wouldn't say that's too big of a differentiating factor. I guess socially something to consider as well, but in terms of academics, not much of a difference.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I would say that MLC, Pymble are schools that obviously have a lot of pedigree, which is why I would kind of say that they're more red ocean schools. If you're very, very smart, you're very, very good, go to MLC, go to Pymble, you're going to be well looked after, right? Like the top cohort. But I'd say the average at MLC and Pymble probably isn't the best, you know what I mean? Just because it's such a big, big school. In regards to Ravenswood and Winona, they're obviously smaller schools, you're going to be more looked after there. But again, they don't have that pedigree. So if you're going to do IB, is it better to do at MLC or Winona? It's questionable, you know what I mean? Depends on where you are. If you want more guidance, if you're at the very top, MLC is definitely going to look after you anyway in the IB. Winona, I'm pretty sure is going to look after you as well. I would personally pick Winona just because it's a smaller school, but you might want to go to MLC if your child is doing very, very well. It also depends on kind of what you like. I think Anastasia touched on this just earlier in terms of what you want culturally for your child. So for example, with like, let's say, for example, a bigger school, there's just more room, I would say, for, more room for things to go wrong. Okay, like in a bigger school, there's more things that kind of slip under the rug. There's more things that kind of can potentially go wrong in that case. So just be aware of that. Whereas I'd say at a smaller school, it's more concentrated. Typically, there's not as much, things like bullying or things like that occurring. So again, just things to be aware of. Okay.
And just to sort of add on to that, like my cohort size was around 130 girls at my school, so definitely not that big. Like there are definitely schools with way bigger cohort sizes, and I think it did definitely allow all of us to sort of get to know each other better. Like I could probably name every person in my cohort, whereas if you're going to bigger schools, you don't really have that opportunity because it's just like too many people. There's probably going to be people in your cohort that you're never going to meet because you're just never going to have a class with them. So if that is a factor for you or your child, like socially, like the culture surrounding that, and you're concerned about things like bullying, then a slightly smaller school would be a better option in that regard.
Yeah, I think bullying is definitely a big concern in girls' schools than boys'
Yeah.
schools, to be honest. So yeah, things to again think about. Okay, top private schools have students from very wealthy families. How do kids from medium income fit and deal with the differences? I'll start by answering this a little bit. So I personally think that in the inner west schools, generally speaking, people are more homogenous in that, there's not that big of a difference. Everyone lives around Strathfield, everybody lives around Burwood. It's not that big of a difference. Whereas if you go to eastern suburb schools or like let's say the upper North Shore schools, there's definitely more of a disparity. But yeah, Anastasia, you want to answer that question from more like emotional perspective? Did you deal with anything like this, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I definitely would say that there is a noticeable disparity in a lot of these schools. Like you can definitely sometimes see the difference in like the attitudes of kids or the attitudes of parents, depending on like income levels and things like that. I don't think one school is better than another at this regard. Like there's always going to be super wealthy families and not so wealthy families. But I would say that no matter what private school you choose, there will always be, for example, scholarship kids or kids that like their parents are working very, very hard just to afford the school, that you will be able to sort of socialize with and actually sort of get someone who's from a similar background to you if that's the position that you're in. So it's there. I can't lie to you. Like there definitely is that disparity, and there will be, like, I'm sure there's always one or two kids in that cohort that are like, the kids that pick on other people for not having as much money. There is that bullying, unfortunately, and I know it shouldn't be there, but it is. But for the most part, if you do surround yourself with good people, no matter what school you go to, it should be okay. And the schools typically do have a way of dealing with that sort of thing.
Yeah. What I would add to that is I think nowadays with financing and stuff like that, there's like finance companies that actually finance your private school fees. There are actually a lot of, I would say a lot more I'd say low to medium socioeconomic status people who end up going to private schools. So people who just make 100,000, 200,000, like 100, maybe $150,000 a year combined annual income, right? Household income, who end up going to private schools. And so really we're dealing with, I'd say, rather average families. And there's more and more of them going to private schools just because, of the demand. Entry year at year 5 or year 7, what is your recommendation? I think year 7 is better. I think private school and primary school is just a waste of money, in my opinion. Anastasia, what do you think? Do you have a different opinion?
Yeah, this is an interesting question for me because both of my parents went to public schools, but I have been in a private school my whole life because my parents didn't have that great of an experience in public schools, which is why they wanted to sort of send me to a private school. But I did notice that a lot of friends that I had went into a private school in year 7, and they didn't really find it to be that different. Like public school was fine for them. It didn't really make that much of a difference. They did OC, they did all this sort of stuff. So I don't think you need to get in at year 5. It is very expensive. Like there are schools that are charging quite a lot of money for year 5, where you're going to be learning basically the same, if not less than OC. So I don't think it's necessary. If you are concerned about, again, like sort of the cultural aspect, like the kid getting adjusted to the school, then year 5 would be a good option, so they can get like, meet friends earlier and so on and so forth. But in terms of an overall perspective, I would say year 7 is fine. Like I don't think you need to spend that much money that early on.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thank you for that answer, Anastasia. Okay, I'll try to sift through the questions. Is Knox a red or blue ocean? I'd say Knox is like turning into a bit of a red ocean now. Knox versus Kings. I think Kings is more culturally diverse than Knox. Kings is a bigger school. I personally like Kings more than Knox. Which is the best school in the Penrith area? You're probably, close to Kings than anything. Trinity, Newington, Shaw. I personally like Shaw more than the other two schools. But yeah, like, each to their own. Trinity and Newington offer IB. Shaw is more English focused in terms of the HSC. Do I have to be great at sport in order to get a scholarship? No, not necessarily. What about Merredin? Merredin's a great school. You want to talk more about Merredin, Anastasia? Like
Yeah.
insights on Merredin?
Yeah, so my school, if you guys know like sort of location wise where it is, it's literally like across the street from Merredin. So they're very, very, very close. And all the private girls' schools in the inner west are concentrated within like 15 minutes of each other. So everything's very close by. What I found with Merredin that wasn't really as present in my school is that there was like a clear difference between the kids that got scholarships and the kids whose parents are like paying for them to get into school. So they do have ranked classes from year 7 to 10, just like most other schools do. I don't know if that's changed in the last year or so, but it should be the same. And from friends that I know that went to Merredin, the kids that got scholarships would hang out with the kids that got scholarships, if that makes sense. So there was like a noticeable difference. But in terms of academics, you'll be sweet if you go to Merredin, right? You'll be completely fine. Like academics wise, they're good. Sports wise, they're good. I guess you would want to think about the social aspect of it though.
Yeah, so touching on the social aspect of things, I think what Anastasia was meaning to say is because Merredin gives out so many scholarships, they give like anywhere from 20 to 30 scholarships, something around that. Every year might be wrong, but a lot of scholarships, a lot more than other schools. Typically what happens is those girls are very oftentimes pretty smart, typically of an Asian kind of demographic. And so what tends to happen is they basically hang around each other and kind of like are separate to the other girls. I know at Pymble, it's not really the case because they mix classes. It probably wasn't the case at Santa Sabina, but Merredin is one of those schools where like the top class is kind of the top class and they're a little bit away from everybody else. We might be wrong, but that's just what I've heard as well. So from a social landscape, it's almost like a bunch of kids who are originally meant to go to a selective school end up in the same class together and obviously kind of develop, their personalities based on, more of a selective school mindset than, the actual, overall Merredin kind of mindset. Okay, how is girls only school? Is there a lot of drama?
Can be sometimes for sure. I did go to co-ed in primary school and then went to all girls in high school. So I can sort of answer from both perspectives. There can be drama for sure. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably heard rumors about stuff like that. Yes, it can be true in pretty much every school. Like you will see drama between girls over all sorts of stuff. But I don't think overall that would be a reason as to why you wouldn't go to an all girls school. Like I think the reason why a lot of people do pick single sex schools is because it can be less distracting, sort of allows you to sort of focus on your education. I think that is definitely true overall, no matter what school you look at, all girls, all boys. I think there is definitely a difference in that over co-ed, but yes, there will be a bit of drama in an all girls school and that's not going to be avoidable. Of course, like it is often surrounding particular friend groups. So, if you don't want to be a part of it, you don't have to be a part of it. So you're not forced into drama just because you choose a single sex school.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the things that I guess parents need to be aware of in that private girls' schools do tend to, I think the higher up you get, the more expensive, basically I'd say there's a scale where the more expensive the fee, the more close you are to like the eastern suburbs, kind of northern districts, that's where the drama kind of probably increases a little bit. I think inner west is kind of like, okay, it's not too crazy, but especially, when the income disparity becomes huge, comparisons on, that kind of stuff, that's where it becomes, slightly problematic. Okay, second question would be, what is the advantage of co-ed? What would you prefer now, Anastasia, like looking back, co-ed versus single sex? And again, we're like generalizing here because obviously Santa Sabina is very different to MLC, very different to whatever. So yeah. And could you comment on the co-ed schools like St. Andrews, like, and compare them to the single sex kind of
Yeah.
schools?
I think in terms of academic performance, usually the single sex schools tend to do better historically and even recently. So that's definitely something that you've noticed. That's a really big factor as to why I went to a single sex school. Like, yes, there is obviously the social side, like you want to be distracted and whatever else, but I think mostly why people choose single sex schools is because of the academics. So what I have noticed is that people that went to co-ed schools generally are a little bit more mature by the time they finish high school. And I guess that does play a big factor if you are actually looking at any interview-based degrees. So if you're looking at med, you're looking at dentistry, anything that has an interview, like you need to be able to communicate with someone of the other sex. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. With co-ed schools, you actually obviously get to communicate with all sorts of people, not just only girls or only boys. So I think socially in terms of development, that can play a big difference. But also if you're someone who plays sport, or if you're someone who does any sort of extracurricular activity where there's most likely people of the other gender, then it won't be a problem. Like for me, I played sport throughout all of school. A lot of sport obviously has boys, girls, everyone. So for me, I still got contact with other people. And so I didn't really find it to be a problem. But there were like girls in my year or girls in other schools that I know that showed up to interviews and got like scared of like being in a class with boys. And then they actually panicked on the spot. I do think though that is the fringe case. I don't think most people will be struggling with that too much.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, I would echo what Anastasia's mentioned in terms of for academic focus. I think single sex schools are better. Sorry, yeah, single sex schools are better for academics, academic focus. I would say I went to an all boys school, so I think I can comment on this. I would say that boys obviously develop a little bit later than girls in terms of a social, like kind of mental, like in terms of mental age. And so you'll notice that typically some boys who come from single sex, and this applies to both selective and private schools, by the way, are a little bit insulated, haven't really talked to, females before. And so, they're a bit slow in terms of that development. So for parents who are out there, just, be aware of that. That does occur. But yeah, like I think the pro of going to a single sex school is you can concentrate a lot better. There's usually not too many distractions, and it's better from that perspective for academics. Okay. What is okay, so if you were to give a top 3 in terms of private schools, I know this is hard, Anastasia, what would you say would be your top 3 kind of private schools for boys and then for girls?
Oh, that is a tricky question.
Like top 1, or just mention 3. It doesn't have to be in order, but like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would definitely split them by HSC and IB, because as you noted earlier, like the IB schools don't really perform that well in HSC.
Yeah.
And obviously HSC schools don't even offer IB. So if you're looking at the top IB schools, they are definitely the Inner West schools. So Trinity and MLC are the top 2 at the moment, so like single sex respectively. If you're looking at HSC in terms of private schools, they are a little bit more spread. So in terms of private schools, perhaps there are some North Shore schools that would fall into that, or some Eastern Suburb schools that I'd consider like some top HSC schools.
Yeah. So in terms of boys, I would say
Sydney Grammar.
Yeah, Sydney Grammar, sure, are pretty much at the top. Whereas on the girls' end, it would probably be possibly Kambala. Merredin's obviously very, very highly ranked. Pymble, Abbottsley, those schools. Yeah, from an academic lens, at least. Okay. Any other questions? We've got another webinar to jump into soon. So let me just quickly see if there's any. Oh, actually, there was one question that I want to ask. How many kids in the UCID med cohort come from private schools as opposed to selective schools?
I think it is mostly selective.
Yeah.
In terms of private schools, they are mostly IB. So if you're looking at like a private school, again, like having that option between IB and HSC, in my opinion, is pretty important, because in terms of looking at like how many private school entrants did HSC or IB, majority did do IB, and the majority of the HSC people were in selective schools. I think overall there are more selective than HSC than private schools, just because like there's a lot more selective schools in general that like.
Can you give a rough outline of, because I'm pretty sure the parents are curious to know how many kids came from Roos, how many kids came from North Sydney boys, North Sydney girls? Do you have those kind of like rough numbers in your head?
Yeah, so with USyd Medicine, as you guys all know, it is a 99.95 ATAR requirement. So there were, for example, other schools that had like, I know UNSW Medicine, for example, had like 20 James Roos kids or something, because it's not a 99.95, it's just like a slightly lower ATAR. So there were a lot of James Roos kids, but in USyd Medicine, there is one James Roos kid. That's it, right? So that's literally it. There's this one guy. In terms of North Sydney girls, there's one girl. In my cohort, North Sydney boys, there's two boys. What other selective schools are there? There's like one girl from Hornsby Girls. There's, yeah, it's pretty much like the North Shore selective schools.
Yeah. So
And
there's
there's
just
people that travel to get there.
yeah, there's just one from each. And then what about the private schools? What private schools are in there? Like I know so there's two from Newington, which I don't know why they got in, but yeah.
three from Newington.
Oh, three from Newington. Okay, cool.
So there's three from Newington. Obviously one from my school, me. 4 from Trinity. So I think they're the highest, like the most people in med are from Trinity, because what you'll notice with med is they don't pick one school over other schools. Like there's usually 1-2 kids max from every school. That's it.
Yeah.
There's one from Sydney Grammar. There's usually typically like 1 or 2 from each. That's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. So that's really interesting. Like 4 from Trinity, 1 from James Roos, and then 3 from Newington, and then what was it, 2 from North Sydney boys or 1 from North Sydney boys?
2 North Sydney boys,
Okay.
1 North Sydney girls. There's like 1 or 2 from Kings maybe. It's like usually capped at 1 or 2, and I don't know if that's like intentional, if they actually check like we don't want to let in too many people from one school, or if it's just results based. I can't tell you because obviously I don't do the admissions process, but that's usually there's no one school that they favor, which is an interesting thing to note.
Cool. Awesome. So very, very interesting. What costs are considered in addition to school fees? You want to talk about costs in addition, like, so school uniform, what else is there?
Yeah, I mean, interesting to note, if you are interested in IB, you do have to pay like $1,000 extra-ish for it, because you do have to get registered with the IB organization, which is in like Switzerland or something, whereas HSC is obviously local, so that's NESA. So that is a cost to factor in. Private schools, including my school, have a bunch of excursions and stuff like that. So it's not really like sort of the one-day excursion where you go visit somewhere. It's usually trips. So we had lots of camps. My school like owns this massive campsite, like an extra campus, like 3 hours from Sydney, and we would just go there and you had to pay for that. There's international trips with school. Obviously that got cut due to COVID, but there was like a NASA trip if you're interested in that a lot of private schools do. There's language trips. If you study a language, you might go to France or Italy or whatever else. So those are costs to factor in, but those are not usually compulsory. So if for some reason like you can't afford that, that's not a problem. And I don't know if they do have any specific structure to help you finance those on top of scholarships, but usually it's not covered. Like usually all these are additional fees on top of the school fees. Also, uniform is quite expensive. I think like private school uniform can cost you like over $1,000. And you have to switch uniforms usually in year 7 and year 10. They have that structure in private schools. Most private schools, they have like a junior and senior uniform. That's the cost. But yeah, it's most of these costs are not compulsory if that's something that's like worrying you.
Yeah, so I'd say factor in like $3,000 to $4,000 a year on top of the normal school fees for that. Cool. Okay, so basically, I think that's about it. That's all we have time for, because we have another webinar to jump into right now, which is going to be on what to do after selective. But thank you all for turning up. And yeah, if you do have any questions, please send us a question across on Facebook, or if you're currently studying at Scholarly, just message us that way through either Tidio or WhatsApp or anywhere with any of your questions, and we're more than happy to assist you in regards to private scholarships. Again, this is a really kind of long kind of, there's a lot of information in regards to private schools, private scholarships, things like that. So we'll probably do another webinar at some point soon, so we can give you guys a little bit more advice. So yeah, save your questions for then, send them in. And yeah, I'll see you guys all very soon. Thanks, guys, and bye.